I presume our candidate is here, right, Catherine? And essentially, here we go.
Well, thank you, Patty. Can you all hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Patty, and thank you, Tom, and thank you, Grassroots Alliance. And Patty, I especially want to thank you for reminding me that I have almost 45 minutes of airtime. I'm glad I had a Gatorade right before this Zoom tonight, but it's great to be back with you guys, and I'm looking forward to answering some of your questions. And I want to say right off the bat that the people on this call are the reason that we almost flipped California 41 in 22. And you are the reason we are going to flip it and finish the job in 2024. And Patty alluded to this at the outset of the call tonight. We did have one of the closest races in the country. And since we're among friends, I will just share the behind the scenes experience that I had in the midterms after having one of the closest races nationally, being up big on the day of the election and having the Democratic leadership believe that I'd actually been elected to Congress. So if any of you have ever been through an awkward job training experience, you're going to really appreciate this story. I was flown back to DC to participate in something called New Congress Member Orientation. They give you a brand new iPhone, which was exciting because I had an iPhone 4 at the time. And I was given a tour of the U.S. House of Representatives. And when I got to the floor, Speaker Pelosi said to me, this is when Congress was still up for grabs, she said, "You are going to be 218. Because at the time, a lot of prognosticators were speculating that California 41 could be the 218 seat. And so I arrived on this enormous high in Washington. We were with about a dozen people who had actually just been elected to Congress. My partner had never been to the US Capitol before. It was a surreal experience. And the speaker is giving a small group of us a tour of the chamber. And she points out the portrait of Lafayette on one side of the podium, points out the portrait of Washington on the other, says, here's where FDR asked Congress to declare war on Japan during World War II. And never forget that Abraham Lincoln was once your colleague in this body. And as those words leave her lips, I get an alert on my phone from a news organization. Ken Calvert defeats Will Rollins in California 41. So it was a real buzzkill at that moment. And my partner and I did what a lot of couples would do. We went to the nearby hotel bar and we're sitting there. And I'm thinking about this surreal experience that I've just been through. And I'm wondering if it's time for me to go back to my old job in law enforcement, because I loved that job. And I start daydreaming about the cases that I worked as a federal prosecutor in the Central District of California. And I loved working with the FBI. I started thinking about the first case that I tried at the U.S. Attorney's Office 6 weeks after I started, didn't know what I was doing, and was told I was going to be trying the #2 opiate prescriber in the state of California, somebody who was prescribing Oxycontin for cash, who ran out of places to hide the cash, and then deposited it at 4 different banks near his medical clinic in Beverly Hills. We busted him for structuring, convicted that guy. Second case I tried at the department, an NYU track star, former Miss Jamaica, who was a JetBlue flight attendant, conspiring with a drug dealer to bring cocaine on commercial aircraft from LAX to JFK. Millions of dollars of coke moving across the country in the overhead compartments on flights from Los Angeles to New York. And the drug dealer she conspired with stole the identities of 2 mentally disabled kids to travel in disguise. Convicted that guy. A third case I tried, a guy who was a university professor selling essentially what were missile guidance chips to the Chinese Air Force. Convicted that guy. And so I'm thinking about all of these great cases, working with the FBI and helping keep our communities safe. And I'm going, you know what? That was a lot more fun than losing a congressional election. I really missed that. I think I'm going to go back. And as I have that thought at the bar, a commercial is interrupted with breaking news from CNN. And it's Donald Trump announcing that he is now running again for president in 2024. And at that moment, I started thinking about another series of cases that I worked and the reason that I got into this in the first place. January 6th and my opponent's response to that attack, while those of us in federal law enforcement were helping track down the people who attacked the US Capitol. He was voting to decertify the election, voting against a commission to investigate the attack, and called for dropping charges even after it had become clear that 5 cops had died as a result of that attack. And in that moment, I think I knew that there really was no choice but to run. Because if you can almost unseat the longest serving Republican in the House from California, your first time ever running for office in a low turnout midterm, you have an obligation to do everything you can to win that seat in the presidential year. And that is exactly what I'm going to do in 2024. So that when my kids and grandkids and all of our kids ask us the question, what did you do when the House was on fire? We can answer that we returned a pro-democracy majority to the US House of Representatives. And that is exactly what the Grassroots Alliance and everybody on this call is going to help do in 2024. So that is why I am back in this race, but it is not just about the freedom to choose our own leaders. Of course, that is paramount, but it's also about the freedom for women to control their own lives and destinies, the freedom to keep the government out of our bedrooms, and the freedom even to just make a living, an honest living in the United States of America. And I think about my grandparents, people like my grandmother who met my grandfather serving in the US Coast Guard during World War II. They were lifelong Republicans, came back to Southern California, started a small business that makes commercial parts for commercial aircraft and fighter jets, and still operates today in the California. And they've got a lot of employees, and they were small business owners who believed in the American dream because that dream became a reality for them. And people like my grandmother would never tolerate an America where she had to pick up the phone to ask her local member of Congress, somebody like Ken Calvert, for permission to make a decision about her own body. That is not America. That is not an America that we want to live in. And it is not an America that we want to live in where members of the US military are getting denied spousal benefits, or their spouses are being denied benefits after they're killed in service just because of who they love. People like me in the LGBT community who grew up wanting to serve in the military after 9/11, but didn't for fear of being outed because of votes by people like Ken Calvert, because he thought that vote was better for our national security than having a military where if you can fly an F-35, who cares if you're gay or straight? People like Ken Calvert are living in the 1950s. And that's why this election is about freedom in so many different aspects of our personal lives for both people like me, my grandmother, and all of us as Americans. It's even the freedom to make a living. Look at the 3 items that my opponent campaigned on in the last election. I'm going to help you with inflation, crime, homelessness. What did he do when he actually got elected? Voted to gut the Office of Congressional Ethics, voted to keep George Santos in Congress, and even voted recently to make it harder for the women in the military to get access to reproductive health care. Those are his priorities. That is not the kind of country that any of us want to live in. And that's why I'm back in this fight alongside all of you to make sure that we flip those seats in California, because the focus of the House majority should be on California. This is our path back to those 5 seats. We have incredible opportunities to win all of them in California in this next election. And it is going to take an enormous grassroots-driven effort to do it. And so I want to share a little bit about where we're at, thanks to people like you on this call, and also what's happening as we move forward in this campaign. So first, some silver linings from the last election. In California 41, we were the only Democratic challenger in the state to win independent voters as a block. That's because I was able to get some bipartisan support from people like the former Republican Assembly leader in California, who believes in democracy and the rule of law, a former Republican sheriff in Riverside County, who also believes in accountability, the rule of law, and our Constitution. And independents like that message. They like a leader to step up and bring people together who believe in our institutions. And I believe in this next election, I am setting my goal, and I promise you I've not had one glass of wine tonight. I believe I can win 25% of Republican voters. That is my mission in California 41, because when people get to know me, they know what my values are, and they know that a lot of our American values are the same regardless of party. Yes, there are some people in the MAGA wing of that party that will never support me, but I believe that we can get more and more people in these purple seats to start supporting pro-democracy candidates that have a bipartisan, truly broad coalition. That's going to happen in California 41. So the other great silver lining from the last election, President Biden's numbers in this district. In California, unfortunately, our turnout was low, and as it was in New York, we were losing Biden plus 13 seats in parts of this country in the midterms. We lost less than 1% off the president's vote share total in this congressional district. That was, again, the best performance of any Democratic challenger in California. And it is because we built something truly unique in this district that we are going to continue to expand on as we continue to grow the campaign and do the grassroots organizing that is needed in a district that has been represented for Ken Calvert by over 30 years. And here's why groups like Grassroots Alliance are so important to flipping these seats. If you look at cities like Menifee, Lake Elsinore, Corona, Norco, Eastville, the western side of my district, there are a ton of Democratic voters in each of those cities who have been represented by Calvert for 30 years with no real hope of defeating him. That has changed. I cannot tell you how many people have come up to me after the last election and said, I didn't know we had a chance to beat this guy until I watched them counting your votes a week after that election. But we know now where we need to focus that grassroots efforts. We beat him by 18 points in the Coachella Valley, but in those western cities, it is thanks to organizations like yours that are going to help us get out more voters, register more people in the off year. We're almost up to a 3,500 voter registration advantage now in this congressional district. This used to be a Republican majority congressional district in January of 2022. We've now already got an advantage that we hope to get to 10,000 by November of 2024. So I could not be more optimistic about flipping seats like this one, both because we're going to have a great grassroots alliance to do it, and because we are going to build the kind of coalition that believes in the American dream that I grew up believing in. Because my story is not possible in any other country than America. It is made in America. Somebody who always wanted to serve in national security, but didn't join because of don't ask, don't tell after 9/11, but found a different path into it and still was able to live that dream and fulfill that dream because our country, those of us who run and who are on this Zoom on the Democratic side of the aisle know that what makes this country great is not that we are perfect. It is the quest to make it more perfect. And that's why I'm back in this fight for 2024. And I am really excited to have some dialogue with everybody tonight, and so looking forward to hopefully meeting a lot of you again in person. And I just cannot say thank you enough. So thank you for all of the help in the midterms. Let's finish this thing in 24. And I look forward to any questions that you all have tonight.
Great. Kim, can you pop me in the front there? There we go. Hi, Will. My name is Catherine Nyhus. I'm the leader of Indivisible South Bay, Los Angeles. For those of you on the call who don't know, Will was born in Torrance and grew up in Manhattan Beach, and that is right in our sweet spot. So we like to claim Will as ours. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I need to give a shout out to Indivisible South Bay, a former Mustang on the call. So
there you go.
A special place in my heart for Indivisible South Bay.
Great. So yeah, it's nice to meet you. I also just want to mention that your campaign advisor, Kobe Ice, is on as well. So if people have any questions for him, feel free to ask questions of him in the chat. I also wanted to mention that the minute you threw your hat in the ring this time, people were so excited because of how you overperformed last time that you immediately got endorsements from the three members of Congress who are running for Senate, of course, Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, and Barbara Lee, and also from our Speaker Emerita, Nancy Pelosi. I'm sure there are some other high-profile endorsements, but I think, in the last cycle, there was a little bit of hesitation about people jumping in to support Will because they didn't know how well he would do. And just as everyone has said, he really, really overperformed. So we need to all be in this time. So this is what we're going to do, everyone. I'm going to start with some questions that I thought about myself, but we are asking people to put questions in the chat. Please don't send them to me directly because I'm good, but I'm not that good. So please type ASK colon, put your question in the chat, and we'll pluck out some as we go along. So Will, I was going to start out just because of what happened yesterday in Congress. You tweeted this morning, "We currently lack a functioning government in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, Ken Calvert is on his way home, leaving our country in disarray. Why should Calvert be allowed to leave DC when he and his colleagues just left us without a functioning government? End quote. So what is your message to your voters about where we are in this current moment? How do we get out of this mess?
Yeah, a great question. And I think that, you know, as somebody who never ran for office, who didn't know a single member of Congress until I did this the first time, I remember reading stories like the one that I saw yesterday that inspired this tweet about members of Congress leaving town when there was a shutdown. Members of Congress leaving town. Now, this is a historic first when there is no Speaker of the House. I mean, I don't understand why it is that the people who are supposed to be in public service, all of whom are paid collectively by our tax dollars on this call, are getting out of town when we do not have a functioning House of Representatives, given every single thing that they have claimed that they want to focus on, right? And this goes back to my original point about what they were campaigning on: inflation, crime, homelessness. The Republican claim that they are better for the economy, which continues to be a misperception among so many voters. Just look at what the effect of the McCarthy speaker battle has had on the markets already. It's already rattled bond markets. It's already made people, the shutdown, the votes in that CR resolution that were initially supported by people like Ken Calvert would have cut funding for local law enforcement, would have cut funding for childcare, would have cut funding for the border. All of these issues that they claim to support, when push comes to shove and you look at their voting records, they don't. And I think what happened yesterday is emblematic of a party that has been hijacked by a nihilistic group of people who do not believe in government. And my message to those folks is go buy a cabin in the woods and don't bother anybody. That's what America, you can do that in America. Why are you in the House of Representatives if you believe the federal government should not exist? Go into a cabin in the woods, get a fishing pole, go hunt. You know, I mean, it does not make sense to me. And there are too many serious issues that the country is facing. And this idea that we can somehow retreat inward and just put up the walls and the world will pass us by and we'll be safe is a naive, backwards looking approach to how America should be leading the world in the 21st century. And so I think Americans, again, going back to my, speaking of naive, effort to get 25% of Republican voters in this next election, which I'm going to stick to that goal. People in both parties want a functioning government. Now, we can have reasonable disagreements about taxation and spending, but what you cannot do is blow up the government to serve your own ends. That's not how democracies function. Hostage taking, slash all spending for childcare, for Social Security, for Medicare, or will tank the United States credit rating. You know, in the case of Matt Gaetz, do line item votes on individual funding, or I'll end your speakership. Investigate Joe Biden for God knows what. They still haven't come up with something, or I'll end your speakership. That kind of QAnon-driven leadership is unfortunately a critical part of the Republican caucus, and they do not have the spine to stand up to any of them. And so I wish I had an answer of what will happen. What really concerns me is the next 40 or so days, because that CR lasts for about another 40 days. And if we don't have a speaker in place and a shutdown happens, that is going to have a real impact on our troops, on people in federal law enforcement. I was in federal law enforcement when some of these shutdowns happened before. That has a real impact on people's everyday lives. And it is sickening to see people pursue their own clickbait-driven fundraising agenda at the cost of people who are putting their lives on the line to keep our communities safe day after day after day.
Thank you. Next question. You have talked about what you call a modern fairness doctrine. We'd love to hear a little bit about that. And if you want to also mention or not Section 230, which is the law that allows platform owners like Zuckerberg and the unmentionable owner of X to not take responsibility for what is posted on their platform. Would love to hear what you think the next steps are for that.
Yeah, so this was something, the genesis of this for me, that when I started really reading more and more about this was after January 6th. And a lot of this has been publicly reported, but and frankly, out of the 2016 election too, those two things are really what has driven my interest in this. And when you see countries like China, Russia, Iran using disinformation, using our own platforms to make Americans mad at each other, to pit neighbor against neighbor, it becomes a national security risk. And one of our greatest advantages as a country historically has been the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. It's enabled us to be relatively safe. But in the digital era, a lot of our adversaries have found out that if you can exploit that broken information system that has developed in the United States, you can get Americans divided, you can get them angry, you can get, and if you've got, unfortunately, a political party that is willing to embrace autocrats for the sake of getting themselves elected, which I thought would never happen in my lifetimes, and I think makes a lot of Reagan Republicans recoil, that's a toxic combination that really puts America at risk. So what I think Congress and more of our elected leaders should be talking about is how do we modernize what the United States used pre and post World War II that developed through the FCC rules that were known at the time as a fairness doctrine in broadcast media. There were only about 4 stations for a lot of the 20th century that were operating on air in the United States. And those were public airwaves. There was a public interest in having multiple issues presented on areas of public importance. And you didn't have a right, an unfettered right, to use those public airwaves to attack somebody without a response, or to act in the interests of yourself without putting the public's interest in part of your programming too. I think we need a modernized version of that across a lot of different platforms. So it's not just Tucker Carlson all day, every day on X now. I used to say this line and it was Fox News. So I have to remember that he's taken a dive into X, but or Rachel, frankly, all day, every day on another network, because what we want to do is create incentives for substantive debate so that we aren't living in silos apart from ourselves. And I'm not saying that this is a simple fix. Our First Amendment is sacrosanct, right? It is not easy to regulate this, but I do think it is a failure of leadership to say that because of the First Amendment, there is nothing the government can or cannot do to incentivize more viewpoints on our broadcast airwaves. And it can't just be limited to cable TV, talk radio, although I believe that we need serious reforms there. It also has to involve something like Section 230. And look, Section 230, the original point of that law, I totally agree with. It made sense. We wanted to have Silicon Valley develop the way that it did in the United States. It has become one of the largest employers and most profitable and successful companies that have ever existed in the course of human history. And that happened here in America. We should encourage things like that. But what we have seen happen now is the algorithms have gotten so effective at driving divisiveness and toxicity because it is profitable and it is dangerous. And there's immunity for companies that know exactly what that software is doing. So I don't think we should completely eliminate Section 230, but I do think that there should be accountability for companies who knowingly put out harmful information. For example, they say, did you know that this plant cures cancer? And they've seen on software that it's been viewed 30 billion times around the globe, and they've made $70 million in advertising revenue by promoting something that their algorithm knows is spreading like wildfire. There should be accountability, just like there should be for any other business owner who's got a sign up in their window that says, I've got a plant here that can cure cancer. Because that kind of negligence rules, the false advertising rules that apply to every other business owner in the United States, need to start applying to the companies who also know exactly what's being spread around the world by their own software. So And to the credit of some of these companies, a lot of them have recognized the need for reform, and a lot of them actually want to partner with Congress on meaningful reform. And God knows we need people with expertise. Now, it doesn't mean you surrender all regulation to the industry you're trying to regulate, but you need people with expertise in Congress, and we need a new generation in Congress that understands the ways that these tech platforms work, and also is humble enough to understand when you don't know how they work, so that you can seek input and advice from people who know what they're talking about. But in my view, the status quo is unacceptable. Americans are only going to become more divided and angry at each other as a result of a lot of what folks in the counterintelligence community have observed over the last 8 years, with our adversaries using our own systems against us without any meaningful response from the federal government and those companies at a broader level. I think we need to take the threat as serious as it is, and I look forward to working on that when I get into Congress in 24.
That's great. Thank you. So what I'm going to do is ask one more question of my own, and then I'm going to pluck some out of the chat. You just mentioned, I think, a new generation in terms of understanding technology, and that's a great segue to my next question. Our Indivisible group was fortunate enough recently to host Ruben Gallego, who is, of course, running for Senate in Arizona. And we've endorsed him because he's fabulous. One of the things that I personally really appreciated about him is I think he's 43, and the average age of a senator is something like 67. Or maybe early 60s. The average age in the House is 57, and you, I believe, are 43. Is that right? No, I'm sorry, 39.
39. Yeah.
39.
You
Right.
scared me. That would have been a big birthday.
Yeah. A whole term you missed. Anyway.
Yeah.
So you were 39. I would love to know, as someone who is not part of the gerontocracy, what do you understand about issues that Gen Xers, millennials are dealing with that a lot of older legislators are not sort of in touch with or not concerned about?
Well, one of my favorite things to do as a candidate has been to go to high schools. I just love talking to young people who are excited about politics, because as a millennial, I will say that I think my generation sometimes has a little bit of cynicism that has crept into their 30s and soon to be 40s. But the younger folks don't have that, actually. It's inspiring to go to these high schools and listen to students who really want to make a difference in their communities. And the number one question I get when I go to these events is, what are you going to do about the climate? And I think that there are so many folks, and Ken Calvert falls right into this category at his age, which is 73, has taken positions that climate change is a hoax. He doesn't really believe in global warming. He is in the pocket of the oil and gas industry. He believes that fossil fuels should continue to permeate the atmosphere ad infinitum. I mean, the young folks in Riverside County do not want to grow up in a world where their homes have become uninhabitable. And a place like the Coachella Valley in Palm Springs, right, that area is going to become uninhabitable if we do not have serious political leaders who understand that issue. And I think that those newer, younger leaders have a much more serious appreciation for that, because a lot of us have young kids. A lot of us have nieces and nephews who are 4 to 6 years old, and we are thinking about their lives and what the country is going to look like if we do not act urgently on the most serious threat mankind has ever faced from the climate, right? And so I think the good news is that the young people are so motivated by this issue, and our party has a great opportunity to talk about why it is so good for our economy to develop a new clean tech sector here in the United States, everywhere we can do it. And so the example I always like to talk about is the Salton Sea, which is just adjacent to my district in the Coachella Valley, one of the largest lithium ion deposits on Earth, that has the potential to fuel a ton of clean tech, high tech manufacturing jobs that can pay up to 6 figures per year in a county where the average income is $70,000. And if we can develop that new kind of technology for all of the green tech that's going to run on it, whether it's cars, planes, trains, everything that's transitioning to that green economy that runs on lithium ion batteries here in the United States, we're not only going to create those good jobs that are high paying here in places like the Coachella Valley and Riverside County, we're going to be able to export that technology around the globe and continue to help our overall GDP grow. And we're going to be able to compete with some of our adversaries like China, because they are trying to beat us into this clean tech economy. And if the Americans at home don't take that seriously, and the Americans in Congress don't appreciate that reality, we are not only going to suffer an existential consequence as a species, we are going to fall behind each one of these adversaries that is trying consistently to outcompete us. This kind of economic growth and future opportunity for young people is something that they see every single time I walk into a high school, and they know it's going to save their lives, and they know it's going to save the lives of their kids. And the second big issue that I think relates to what young people, and this is more of a millennial engagement that I've had back and forth with millennial voters, is gun violence. And it's because of all of us, again, who have kids in this range, and you've seen things like Uvalde, and you've seen Congress's reaction. Now, they got something done, but my opponent voted against that bill. And if you can't vote against background checks, even after Uvalde, if you believe that somebody who threatens to shoot up a school deserves the right to go into a Walmart the next day and buy an AR-15 because you won't even support red flag laws, which is Calvert's position on this, I will tell you, even NRA members in my district think he's out of touch. That is saying something. I mean, and this is a guy who's gotten more money from the NRA than any other member of Congress in California. And he's not supporting red flag laws. All red flag law does is say, if you are dangerous, if you have threatened to commit a mass shooting, you shouldn't have your hands on a gun. And a judge has to decide that. And he can't even vote for something as basic as that. And I will tell you that, again, working in law enforcement and looking at the gun homicide rates in Riverside County, this is somebody who does not know how to keep you safe. He doesn't know how to keep me safe. He doesn't know how to keep our kids safe. And young voters are acutely aware of that, and they're going to stand up to him and push back and win this seat in 2024.
That is a great answer. Thank you. Next question comes from Patty Crane. I had the same question on my list, which is, what do you wish we activists understood about your district, CA-41?
Great question. I think, the big thing that I alluded to earlier is I need help in the western side of my district for sure. And we know this because we went back and looked at the data after I, looked at the outcome and saw where we did really well. Coachella Valley, 18 points, Palm Springs, Rancho Mirage, Palm Desert, La Quinta, Indian Wells. We know we did well there. We also know that that is a market that is less expensive than the LA media market. So people were actually able to see the contrast between me and Calvert. And when they saw that contrast, we did really, really well. We beat him decisively. In the LA side of the district, it is the second most expensive media market in the country. And I would walk into stores, and the difference between going to a grocery store in Palm Springs where folks had been watching TV before the election versus going to a grocery store up in Lake Elsinore or Canyon Lake or Menifee. I mean, it's a huge difference, the impact that can have on people if they just don't know that they're even living in a seat that's competitive, right? And they don't know that they have a meaningful shot at defeating Calvert, which unfortunately a lot of Democrats in those cities on the western side didn't fully realize. That's why we saw the 30 to 50% turnout. The good news is that we expect another 120,000 people to vote in 2024. And the margin in this, that is 10 times the margin. So 240,000 people voted in the midterms, 360,000 are going to vote in the presidential year. And so where we really need the help is on that western side of the district, because Democrats can be energized in a way that I think we have a really unique opportunity to do that has not been done in this seat for a really long time. And I always give credit to people like Mark Takano, who almost defeated Calvert in one of those first elections in 1992, came within a few hundred votes. And, that is as close as it has been since Bill Hedrick in 2008, who came within 2 points the year that Obama was on the ballot. And the good news, again, is we've got the registration numbers now up to a growing majority, but it's signing up on our site to help volunteer. And we've got a great list of people who have done that. We can send information about exactly how to target your volunteering. And we can get folks signed up for both door knocking and also, especially in the off year, just to circle back to my point about voter registration. We really want to get that number to 10,000. And Kobe and I were just talking about this morning. We've got great community colleges and universities that are in and near the district, where we're setting up tables to try to get people registered day after day after day. And we're also going to try to do that at naturalization ceremonies so that we get as many new voters in the door in this off year as possible. So we've got a big electoral advantage as we head into 2024. So we could use all the help we can get on that western side of the district.
Great. A few people in the chat are asking about how to talk to sort of centrist people and even Republican people. And one specific question is, a lot of Republicans think, oh, Biden's spending so much money, the deficit's out of control. How do you answer that concern in your district?
I love the deficit question because, as I'm sure a lot of us on the call know or have read about, right? Donald Trump added more to the federal deficit in one term than I think every president for the last 250 plus years, right? So 7 trillion. And that was, by the way, when they did that, what's remarkable is they also managed to increase taxes on Californians. This was a bill that punished blue states and added trillions to the deficit. And that's exactly what Ken Calvert voted for. And so if you remember, hey, a few years ago, I was able to deduct more of my state and local income taxes. That's right, because MAGA Republicans decided that they wanted to punish California and New York. Now, whatever you may think of that policy, if you actually represent California in the House of Representatives, you shouldn't be supporting that bill, right? I mean, that really was designed to hurt us. And the #1 state to benefit from that 2017 bill, which added trillions to the deficit, was Wyoming. And I always like to ask when I'm in a room full of people, how many of you paid $0 in federal income taxes last year? And very few hands go up, 0 hands go up, because a lot of people pay more than what Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk have paid twice in the last decade, which is $0. Some of our largest corporations, $0 in federal income taxes. That is what is adding. We do have welfare in the United States for corporations, supported by people like Ken Calvert, because that's how he bankrolls his campaign. From the moment I got into this first race, I've raised more money from actual human beings every single quarter than this guy, because he cannot raise money from real people. He gets it from massive corporations who he will then give massive tax cuts to, instead of to the people in Riverside County who make $70,000 a year, or the small business owners who are trying to get a little bit more money in their pocket when costs are rising. And so when I try to talk to those centrist Republican voters, I try to talk about, I care about the deficit. I don't think we should be paying a lot of our tax dollars every year to service that debt with rising interest rates. But let's be real about the math and who's actually contributing to it. The Republicans, when they're in charge of Congress, remind me of like the drunk kids you find after a weekend at high school, right? You've left them at home and you come home and everybody's having a great time, free money. And then the adults have to come in and remind you, no, you just exploded the deficit. We're all going to be paying our debt for the next, century and a half, because you guys have no sense of fiscal responsibility, which used to be a cornerstone of the party until it went off the deep end. But I obviously feel passionately about this, this subject, but I just think we should own fiscal responsibility, because unfortunately right now, there's only one political party in the United States that cares about it or that can do anything about it responsibly. And so I continue to make that a centerpiece of my campaign.
Thank you. That's great. I had a question on my own docket about abortion, and someone else asked a question as well. So I'll sort of combine it together. My question was, ever since the Dobbs decision, we have seen sort of special election after special election go our way. And even the midterms, even though people like you did not win, we overperformed, and you almost did. And then this other person is asking, Deb Garvey is asking, I guess reproductive rights don't resonate much in California because we have a Democratic state trifecta, but Gen Z are of childbearing age, and they would have to care if they left our state boundaries. So I guess the larger question is abortion. What are voters in your area thinking about, talking about? How do you campaign on that issue?
Yeah, great question. And it is something also that routinely comes up with young voters, millennials, Gen Z, for sure. And I think what happened in California and New York last cycle was a bit of a fluke, because I think it's correct that people believed incorrectly that they would be perfectly safe in these blue states where it was legal at the state level. But the reality is, when the federal government is controlled by a party that believes in government mandated pregnancy, they will impose that mandate through federal law on everybody. And they will have federal agents searching doctors' offices in California, stopping people from boarding planes, arresting people if they get their wish, which is a federal national ban with no exceptions, something that my opponent supported in the 1990s. And by the way, the law he supported, it would have been arrest first and then put a burden on the woman to prove that there was a rape, that she needed it, and getting a doctor in it. But that's how his legislation would work. And I got to tell you, as a federal prosecutor, thinking about the way that actually would have been implemented, any woman in the United States who had an abortion would have been arrested by federal agents under that law. And then they would have been sitting in jail, detained, right? Or with an ankle bracelet, thinking about how they were going to go into court to prove to a judge that was a medically necessary abortion, or that they had been raped. I mean, that is the kind of Orwellian world that my opponent wants to live in. And the reason I share that is because that federal concept of it being nationwide, that is exactly what is at stake in 2024. And that is going to make an enormous difference in states like California and New York. And if you look at some of the decisions that have been coming from federal judges, including the mifepristone decision, I think that was a district judge in Texas, that would have been nationwide. Ken Calvert has already supported nationwide restrictions on mifepristone. And I believe that come next November, people in California and New York are going to appreciate the reality of the threat of a federal national ban. And that is going to drive turnout in a way that I think we've seen in places like Kansas and Alaska, because people knew what was at stake. And I believe in 2024, with Congress and the White House at stake, people will step up to the plate. And it's absolutely going to be another huge centerpiece to my campaign as I go around Riverside County. And I believe we will win a huge number of young women, people who have women in their lives and deeply care about equality and reproductive freedom for everybody in the United States.
Great. We only have time for a few more questions. I don't know how this time flies, but it always does. Larry Martin from Indivisible, Sonoma County, is going to jump in and ask a question.
Hi, Will. Right at the start, Connie Kohler asked, what was your experience working with KDEM during the midterm? Positive or negative? What type of support did you get? What could KDEM have done better to put you over the top? And how can we fill the gaps?
A good question. So KDEM, I had a primary last cycle, and I just missed the endorsement early. The good news is we don't have a serious primary this time around, and we feel really confident about that endorsement. And so I think having the early endorsement, and part of the reason I launched early, was to amass as many resources as possible that we could use against Calvert and to really lock down that party support early. And I will tell you, it's already been a very different experience this second campaign with the enormous support that we've had from the California congressional delegation, 30 members of Congress, all 3 of the US Senate candidates, Senator Boxer, some great people in our corner from day one. And so I believe we're actually close to opening a joint office already with the California Democratic Party in Riverside County. And we've done a lot more coordination this cycle early than we were able to do last cycle. And part of it is just having only 5 months from June to November. So I think the biggest advantage we have now is a clear primary field and a really great runway that's taken us. We've got the luxury of time. I was not in this race at all until the end of 2021. And so we've got a lot of support and great coordination going on among the campaign and the California Democratic Party already, which is fantastic.
Fantastic. And then Beth Hadley, who happens to be the president of the Sonoma Valley Democrats, says they've adopted 41 as their sister district and wants to know what your position is on single payer healthcare.
Well, thank you for adopting me, by the way. I definitely appreciate it, and we need it. So thank you. Look, I think that everybody should have a baseline of coverage in the United States, period. So I do believe that there should be universal healthcare coverage in the United States. And I think the question is, how do we get there? Because a lot of folks want to keep insurance that they have through their employer. And I get that. And so I think because we have that desire and that political reality in the United States that people are going to want to keep the healthcare that they are, the health coverage that they are satisfied with having, we have to come up with a baseline public option of care for people so that they are guaranteed coverage no matter what, but we're not forcing people to leave plans that they may like in the private marketplace. But I do support universal coverage because I think that's actually going to have a huge advantage with transparency. And the other thing I'll say about this is, I think when you have that baseline level of care that's provided to all Americans, regardless of income level, you've got another major player in the healthcare market that will help the pricing for people who are on private plans. And the other thing that'll help with this is more federal requirements around transparency in pricing for the insurers and the hospitals. You shouldn't be in a position where you ever have to go to a hospital and you're not sure what your insurance company was billed by the hospital or what the other hospital charged for the same procedure. That's not right. It makes no sense. It makes prices non-competitive. It enables the private marketplace to raise premiums without telling us or disclosing any of their relationships with the hospitals, which are often the subject of non-disclosure agreements. So I think Congress has to look at increasing transparency in the private marketplace, but definitely providing that baseline of coverage for all Americans. Because the reality is, if you don't get that preventative care early, if you don't have coverage early, those costs are only going to spiral. And as your condition worsens, that's why the cost of healthcare is always at its highest in the last 6 months of life, because people haven't gotten that preventative care that they could have had if they'd gotten better insurance early.
Great. And one more question. I hope we haven't exhausted you tonight, but you've done a great job. I cannot leave you without asking you about the Supreme Court, especially because you have been an assistant U.S. attorney. I would imagine that it is not a stretch to say that you agree with ethics reform, but there are all these other proposals about how to sort of try to fix the court, term limits, expanding the court, what do you think is the right solution?
I think the number one thing we have to do is depoliticize it, because that was the point of the judiciary. Respect for precedent, respect for basic individual rights, respect for the Constitution as read and interpreted by the justices who had come before you, even if you disagreed with those decisions, and not inventing legal reasoning that never existed to decimate long-standing precedent in the United States and impose your own policy prescriptions for a solution that's just straight out of the Federalist Society, right? So I think, how do you depoliticize the court? Well, I think an expansion, what worries me about that is a tit for tat reaction. Anytime the Senate gets switched, anytime the White House switches, you're going to get more pushes to expand. So what I propose is some combination of expansion plus rotating circuit judges on and off the federal appeals court plus term limits. So, and also one thing that I'm still thinking through is whether we want to randomize cert petitions as well. And the cert petitions are those cases that are picked by the Supreme Court from the circuit level that are then heard each year. The justices decide those cases. But if you randomize those petitions, the justices would just be given cases obviously at random. So they wouldn't be able to weigh in on some of these issues that are highly political. It would be a true random neutral process. The other kind of interesting reform around cert petitions is maybe have all of the federal circuit judges vote for which cases are heard by the U.S. Supreme Court. So that then you've got a majority of federal circuit judges deciding what are the most compelling legal issues that need to be addressed right now by the justices. And if you do that, you also take some of the politics out of it, because the longer folks are on the bench, the longer they've been removed from the political process. And also, if you randomize the selection of those circuit justices up to the court, it becomes more difficult to game the system, because circuit judges over time will never know whether they're actually slated for a random term on the Supreme Court. And the longer they've been on the bench, the less connected they are to the political process, the more challenging it is for both political parties to select jurists who are guaranteed to rule a particular way on a particular case. at any given time. So I think we need to look at reforms like that to try and get the judiciary back to where it was, which is a true independent branch of government that respects precedent and individual rights.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I want to remind everyone else in the call, do not hang up, because if you are interested, we're going to have a sort of internal conversation afterwards. But Will, thank you so much for joining us. You can tell that we are all pulling for you already. Hopefully a lot of us can help you in, many different ways, starting now through next year. So thank you.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you guys so much for taking the time tonight. And I will leave you with this last word, which is something that Senator Boxer said, which is in this country's darkest moments, we have always been able to do the right thing because just enough of us have decided to step up to the plate. And so whenever I'm feeling cynical, I think about those words because I believe that in 2024, just enough of us are going to step up and do the right thing, including 25% of Republicans in California 41. So thank you guys again for having me tonight. Really, really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to seeing everybody hopefully in person.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Okay. So how exciting is that to hear that many good answers from one person in one sitting? Awesome. No wonder people kept coming back from CA-41. So very, very excited.